Good evening, everybody. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. What a great crowd. My name's Lissa Muscatine. I'm one of the co-owners of Politics and Prose. My husband and co-owner Brad Graham is right here. On behalf of our great staff, we welcome you all, and we want to thank all of our friends and partners here at Six and I. We love doing events here. How many of you have been to an event here before? All right. Well, I can see why you're coming back. It's one of our favorite venues, and we're especially excited for tonight's event. So I think you've been given instructions on how this is going to proceed. We are really, really honored, and it's a pleasure to host a woman recognized by millions of people across our country and around the world. Most of us, most of you, I think, know her as one of the most influential and toughest journalists in television. She's also a former high-powered lawyer. She's a mother of 3, and now, perhaps most important to us, she's also an author. Megyn Kelly is here with us to talk about her new book. It's called Settle for More. Is that not a great title, or what? I think it's fantastic. It says a lot in 3 words. Settle for More is a memoir, and the one thing I can say with some assurance being in the book business is that there's an art to writing a memoir. And there's an even more of an art to writing a good memoir, and there's even more of an art to writing a great memoir, because it has to tell the truth, it can't pull any punches, and most of all, the author must be willing to expose some of their own blemishes and vulnerabilities to explain who they are and what they're about. And let me just say, Settle for More is a great memoir. It's a great, great memoir. Megyn takes us through her childhood in upstate New York, through her career as a successful corporate lawyer, her decision to abandon that life for a risky new venture, and her evolution in her roles as a professional woman, a spouse, and a mother. Along the way, she takes a deeply critical look at herself, including some personal demons that she had to tame as she searched for personal fulfillment and professional success. And one other very important point about this book, it is really, really funny. Actually hilarious in places. Megyn has an incredibly quick and acerbic wit, which may explain how she survived some of the very challenging environments she's had to work in and some of the very contentious people she has covered. I'm not mentioning any names. Now, you all know that there is much more to Megyn's story than I've just outlined, especially what she's been through in the past 18 months. Megyn, if it's any consolation, I don't know how many of you have been following the local news about Pizzagate and the 5,000 block of Connecticut Avenue where Politics and Prose is located. We know a little thing or two about the real consequences of fake news stories. And we are with you. We're with you. And we haven't experienced half of what she has. But anyway, to help us get to the heart of her book and her story, we're very lucky to have with us another superb broadcast journalist, Katty Kay. Katty's well known here in Washington and beyond. She's the Washington anchor for BBC World News America. I'm sure many of you have seen her on MSNBC's Morning Joe and NBC's Meet the Press. We're delighted that Katty will be in conversation with Megyn tonight. Please join me in welcoming these 2 exceptional and extraordinary women.
You must feel like a rock star.
That was fun.
Can we just carry on like that all night and have an hour of applause?
I know, let's rerun it.
That would be
Let's just
great.
re-rack that. That's how we're opening the Kelly file tonight.
Yeah, there's so much, criticism and negativity around. To walk into a room where everyone loves you is so great.
I was just saying on the show last week that this book tour has been the opposite of the internet.
It's all real people. Thank you all for coming on winter's Monday night in Washington. And I know the traffic is hell because Rock Creek is shut. So we're especially appreciative that you've joined Megyn and I here. I know Megyn, so full disclosure, we're friends. And it's a real treat for me to have the chance to sit and talk to her for an hour. I've got your questions too, and I will throw them in randomly during the course of the evening. I read Settle for More over the course of the weekend. It's great. It's beautifully written. It's funny. It's honest. I have to admit, Megyn, when I was first asked to do this, I thought, how does somebody of your age write a memoir?
Yeah.
You're just, starting in life.
Well,
kind
there's
of
a story to
of
that.
the arc.
There's a story to that because originally I was going to write a book about this segment I do on the Kelly File called Cupcake Nation. When we see the wussification of America and we see these millennials who can't function if they've suffered any sort of offense, and it was really irritating me, it really gets under my skin. And so I call them Cupcake Nation, and whenever we do one of these stories, that's the animation we run. So I was going to write a book on that. But the more I started to write about that, the more I realized there's a reason I'm like this. And there's a reason I feel this way, and I actually thought I can explain it to people better if I walk them through how I got to this place and why I find that Cupcake Nation thing so objectionable and so deeply problematic for our society and for those 20-something-year-olds. And the bottom line there is that adversity, while not fun to go through, is an opportunity to grow and become stronger. And, just take where Lissa left off. If I had had no adversity in my life, and if I had had parents who had kept me in a protective bubble for 45 years, how do you think I would have handled the past year? I would have been crying under my desk. So the reason I was able to handle that tumult is because I had been through iterations of that before.
Okay, so let's go back and start at the beginning. Albany, New York, and Linda and Ed, your parents, who I love, by the way. Linda's just great. Takes the piss out of everything. She's almost British. And I say that as a compliment.
My mom is one of the stars of this book, I will say.
She's definitely one of the stars of the book. What I love,
which she loves.
Yeah, I bet. So what I love about your parents, and this is perhaps another Britishism of mine, is the idea that they inculcated in you, and this might sound counterintuitive, the idea that you weren't particularly special. I love that.
Right.
And that not everybody is a winner. I hate that.
Right.
So I think that the values that you have compared to we both have kids, the world that our kids live in, where you get a trophy just for showing up at the game.
Right.
It drives me kind of crazy.
I've had enough of that, and I certainly didn't grow up with that. I write in Settle for More that my parents' attitude was not, "You're so special." It was more like, "You don't seem that special so far, and that's just fine by us." Like, we are open-minded to specialness, but we don't see it yet. And that was a gift to me, because honestly, I felt zero pressure to achieve or succeed growing up. I could tell they wanted me to be happy. You did have to be funny in my family. You had to have a good sense of humor. You didn't have to be funny, but you had to have a good sense of humor. And you had to engage. You weren't allowed to sit like a potted plant at the dinner table. But beyond that, it was like, you seem happy. Are you happy? Good. Good luck. And that worked out very well for me. And so, my mom, that all started with my mom and dad. And by the way, on the participation trophies, I make this point in the book. It wasn't that if you achieved, they didn't give you praise. They did give you praise. If you did something well, you got it. But there was no pressure to achieve.
And your older brother and sister, who also, all your family, this is really about Megyn's family, this book. And your older brother and sister, you tell a story about how your dad would get you and he'd ask you, what had gone on in your day, or you'd have to have a conversation, and your older brother and sister would say something, and then it would get to Megyn's turn, and you would go on and on and on. And your older brother and sister would be like, "She's talked enough, shut her up."
Right. Make her shut up, they'd say. So my dad, who was an educator, he taught PhD students in education, would go around the dinner table every night. We all five of us had dinner together every night growing up. First in Syracuse, then in Albany, upstate New York. And my dad would say to everybody, "What's the report?" And he'd go down the line, and my brother, my sister, and myself, "What's the report?" And Pete and Suzanne would give these laconic answers, just a few words here and there. And then sure enough, he'd get to me, and I'd go on, I'd prattle on and on and on and on. And they would say, "Make her shut up." And my dad would say, "You had your chance," and he'd say, "And now you will listen to her." And actually, my friend proposed naming my book that.
Served you pretty well, I imagine, in law and in broadcasting. You paint Megyn a picture of clearly a very happy family, but there's two incidents that really struck me during the course of your childhood, and we should talk about those. And the first was what happened when you got into 7th grade. You'd been surrounded by friends, you'd been Miss Popular, you'd going to schools, and then bam. Middle school's brutal anyway, but for you, 7th grade was a nightmare.
It was, and it was It's I think, the second chapter in the book, and it's about my 7th grade year. It's called Mean Girls in the book. And honestly, it's still hard to talk about to this day. So now I just turned 46 on November 18th, and this happened when I was 12. Don't make me do the math, but it's a long, long time. And I can still get teary about it if I really think back on what happened. I had always been somewhat popular. You know, I never really struggled. I was not attractive at all. I had no appearance currency. You know, I was never one of those girls that are like, oh my God, she's so beautiful. My parents used to be like, she's going to be with us for a long time.
Okay, this is why the book is so great, because you talk about putting on weight and having acne.
And I had a huge
huge
space between my 2 front teeth, which came from my dad. And when I got to be 12, my mom's like, don't you want to have that fixed? And my dad was like, don't you want to look like Lauren Hutton? You know, I'm like, I'm going to go with my mom. But the point is, I grew up unattractive. I was kind of chunky. I did have bad skin. My hair was hideous. That's my friend's fault, who insisted I try sun-in every summer. Anyway, I didn't look good. You have to not picture this version of me where there are 2 people over there, they pay to make me look good. Everybody here would look glamorous if they had 2 people who they paid.
And it's worth us pointing that out, by the way.
Yeah. So I did have currency in my personality and my friendships. You know, like that to me was important to my own ego and my sense of self and worth. And for whatever reason, everyone here has been through 7th grade, the group just turned on me one day. And so many people have said, why? And it's like, the group requires no reason, you know, nor do they really provide an explanation. They just turned. And I went from being a popular girl to being an object of disgust for them. I mean, it wasn't just that they didn't want to hang out with me, it was that I repulsed them. And you could just feel it as I would walk through the halls. You know, they would throw things at me. They would constantly make comments about my body, about my skin. And it culminated in this horrible episode where I was, and let me just couch this by saying I know that people have had it so much worse, so please understand, I know that. But at the time, I didn't have that perspective. But I was home with my parents on a Saturday night, and the leader of the group called, and she said, she was having a party, and she said, Megyn, do you know where all the people from my party are? And I said, no. And they all yelled into the phone, we're here. Honestly, I can still get upset about it to this day. It was just so cruel, you know? And I was already feeling so vulnerable. And my parents were watching me. And I hadn't disclosed to them even that I was being bullied. Never mind to this extent. I went out into the backyard. It was a cold, snowy Albany night in the winter, and I skated on top of the snow, which had been iced over in my sneakers, just with tears streaming down my face in the darkness. And just felt so isolated and alone and targeted. And as I read in the book, it didn't stop until the spring when this beautiful angel named Heather Shepard came and sat next to me at lunch and befriended me just for no particular reason. You know, she did, and my mom, by that point, knew something of the bullying and said, all you need is one. You know, and she befriended me and changed everything for me. And I mean, she really changed everything for me. And do you know that we remained friends for years? I never really articulated to her how grateful I was for that until really this book. And she knows my mom. They both live in Albany still. And she read it, and she called my mom and said, you know, she helped me too, which meant so much to me. Anyway, to this day, I cannot tolerate bullies. And I do think one upside... What?
Yeah, and you've done a little more than going out the backyard and skating when you've encountered them.
I think one upside of the bullying, and there are a few, I mean, I would not recommend this, is I do have empathy for people. I have empathy for true victims of negative events. That's not to say that I believe in, I don't like that word victim. I think even if you have been victimized, it's just a self-defeating word that can mess with your head. But I do have great empathy for people who have been through hard times.
One question I had reading the book, and you mentioned it there about how you didn't tell your mum and dad. You were clearly very close to your mum and dad. Why do you think you didn't?
I was ashamed.
Isn't that amazing?
I felt their repulsion. I started to believe I was repulsive, that I was doing it all wrong.
It was your fault.
Yeah, that it was my fault, that I wasn't likable. And that was an area in which, my parents did value that. They wanted me to have friends. I mean, like normal parents, they wanted me to have friends. So while they were never saying, like, you need to be attractive. I write in the book about one day I was leaving the house, I was about 7, and my mom said, I know a little girl who didn't brush her hair today. And I was like, and out I went. And she didn't make me brush it. I mean, I would make Yardley brush her hair, just for the record. But the point is, they didn't put any pressure on me to look good, but there was a certain understanding that I should have friends. And I felt embarrassed that I didn't.
Your dad died when you were young, and you'd clearly had a very good relationship with him. But, and I'm sure that for those who are going to read the book, the night he died, you had a row.
Yeah.
And that, for me, is the other saddest moment in this book. The bullying and the fact that you rowed with your dad when he died.
Yeah. That actually is a story I've never told publicly before this memoir, and I wrestled with it. I really wasn't sure how much I wanted to disclose about that night. Not because of people like you sitting here, people who are open-minded and I hope kind-hearted and hopefully can view me through, if not a generous lens, then a neutral lens. But, there are haters out there. And I certainly didn't want them messing with my father's death, right? This is what it's like to be a public figure today, and a private figure if you expose anything about yourself publicly. But in the end, I thought it is integral to who I am. And I know that there are other people out there who have lost somebody under less than ideal circumstances in terms of the relationship. And I thought maybe it makes you feel better when you know that somebody you can relate to has had a similar circumstance. And listen, for the record, my dad and I had a beautiful relationship. I was only 15 when he died. He was 45. He had no heart problems. He was fine. And then 10 days before Christmas, 1985, he dropped dead of a heart attack. And it was a stupid fight, and it was over a class ring. I was being a stupid 15-year-old girl who wanted a nicer class ring than we could afford. And he was telling me, we can't afford that nicer ring, and I wouldn't let it go. And he had it, so he turned and he walked out of the kitchen, sort of threw up his hands at me. And he never got mad. I mean, like, he wasn't that kind of parent. My mom, on the other hand, she would get mad. But he turned and walked out, and I walked past him in the living room to go upstairs to my bedroom. And my last sight of him was, he was staring at the Christmas tree in the living room, a good man, alone. And that's just something I have to live with, that it ended on those terms. Because the next thing that happened was my sister came into my office, my room, and said, wake up, Daddy had a heart attack. And he was never revived. And I write in the book about going to the hospital and, I don't know if you've ever lost anybody, but going in there and seeing him, having the chance to say goodbye. How strong my mom was. My mom, who was 44 years old at the time. She's got 3 kids. 2 kids are in college, and then there's me, 15-year-old me, headed for college. She's a nurse at the VA. She does not have a lot of money. And my dad had just canceled the major insurance policy we had because he was like, I'm 45 years old. He wasn't a heart patient. He didn't think he would need it. So we had money problems facing us, and my mom knew that as well. But she was such an example for me in those moments, not by preaching. She never said to me, you must be strong. You must not cry, which she cries all the time. So do I, obviously. It's like being on Oprah's couch.
We're just having a little therapy session out here.
But she you know, she made very clear that you have to function in the face of emotional upset. That's the mark of a truly healthy person, not avoiding emotional upset, but functioning in the face of it. And that is something I can do.
So this is why I love Linda too, because you talk about how she's strong, and she was incredibly strong after your father died. But you tell a story of how you've been a lawyer, and we're jumping forward several years now, and you get to New York, you've been in Chicago, and you move to New York, and you ring home and you cry because you're lonely and your apartment is cold. And on the first night, she's super sympathetic.
Yep.
And the second night, she's kind of sympathetic. By the third night, she's like, shut up.
Exactly. She said, by the third night, she said, Megyn, stop playing the victim. Not attractive. And man, did that jolt me out of my little self-pity party. You know, it was because she had been there. She had been empathetic. And then it was like, now you're being ridiculous. Toughen up, Buttercup. And it helped me. Honestly, it helped me. I think about it to this day. Toughen up, Buttercup about sums up what I want to say to just about everyone in the millennial generation.
Do you say it to your own kids?
Toughen up, Buttercup? Well, they're babies now. No, they're 3, 5, and 7, so it might be cruel.
I don't know, it sounds like you're... No, but are you bringing... I guess it's a broader question. Are you bringing up your kids with the same values of not everyone's a winner that your parents brought you up with, even in this generation?
Oh, I've already thrown away my son's participation trophy. It went right in the garbage. I know, I'm sorry, I did. I went to my daughter's school. We had like the parent-teacher conference at the beginning, and she was like, what is your core message to Yardley? And I said, you are not special. The teacher's like, what the hell?
Bad Mom of the Year award.
But you know, I mean it in the context that I've just delivered it to you. No, I don't jump for joy every time they give me a piece of paper that's got 3 lines on it, like they're the next Picasso. Like, oh, that's nice. I mean, true, I just don't, I try not to tell them that they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. I love them to death. I kiss them and hug them all day long, tell them how much I love them, but I don't tell them how extraordinary they are all the time. But I am open-minded to extraordinariness.
Should it come along.
Right.
So we've jumped forward to your law career. You switched, became a lawyer in Chicago and New York, and after, what was it, 10 years or something in law?
Yeah,
you
almost 10
decided
years,
law was
nine
not for
years.
you, and you write these fabulous journal entries, which are sort of full of angst. It's rather charming, about how I'm more exciting than this, and I need more than this in life.
Yeah.
What was it that made you, why was law not enough?
I actually put some of my journal entries in the book.
They're hilarious.
You can read them firsthand as a little Bridget Jones diary. If I included the real journal entries, like all of them, you'd really feel that. Except I didn't smoke, but like she did. But you know, I had been practicing law for over 9 years, and as a kid from upstate New York who never came from circles of power, it meant a lot to me to be a lawyer. You know, I just thought, like, I have arrived, and now people are going to have to take me seriously. And I liked this sort of, you know, I'm fierce and I'm tough and I'm serious. Megyn Kelly, Esquire. Yeah. And so I was really reluctant to walk away from it because it meant something to me, you know, to my self-image. But I really did ram head first into that brick wall of unhappiness. And then you get to a point where you can't deny it anymore. You know, you cannot deny your unhappiness. Like, malaise and mediocrity are, I think, they're sort of hard to get out of. But then when you're just dreadfully unhappy, it's like, okay, now I have to go. And that's where I got as a lawyer.
And how did you get into journalism? What was it that
So,
triggered the idea that you'd go from being a lawyer to a broadcast journalist?
well, I had always been interested in journalism, but I got rejected from the Newhouse School at Syracuse, which I just love to remind them of now. They don't care, but it means something to me.
They're like, yeah.
And so when I decided to leave the law, it was a natural, okay, so this is something I'd always wanted to do, and I wasn't able to do it, but maybe I could do it now. But, you know, it's not that easy to jump into a career as a broadcast journalist. And so I really was determined, but without the immediate plan. And then, honestly, in retrospect, I feel like my father may have had a hand in it. Because my dad and his guitar playing is a theme of the book.
John Denver.
Absolutely. And that's what we used to spend. We never took a fancy family vacation. We always went to Selkirk Shores Park up on Lake Ontario in New York, and he'd play the guitar around the campfire, and we would dance and sing and that kind of thing. And so I tried to learn guitar, and I was taking guitar lessons once a week in Chicago when I was an unhappy lawyer. And lo and behold, a woman in my guitar class, as it turns out, was a producer for WMAQ, which is the NBC affiliate in Chicago, which I didn't even know. But she missed class one weekend because the space shuttle had blown up. And when she came back, I said, "Meredith, where were you?" And she said, "Well, I'm in news." "You're in news?" And honestly, I believe in stuff like this. I just feel like there's a reason I was in that guitar class, and there's a reason I connected with this woman, and this beautiful, lovely woman who, sometimes people can be competitive, and they don't always extend the hand of generosity and friendship to help another woman in a competitive industry in particular. This can happen to guys too. But she was just the opposite of that, and had endless generosity for me, and helped me make a resume tape, and gave me a lot of tips on how to get into the business. And within 6 months, I had my first TV job, part-time, and then within 12 months of that, Fox News hired me.
Okay, first question. What's the rewarding aspect of being a news anchor? What's the most challenging aspect?
The rewarding aspect. Well, I would definitely say the most rewarding aspect is the responsibility that, they've given me and that I've earned. It's not so much speaking truth to power, it's being able to hold people in power accountable. That's the most rewarding aspect of it. That you can ask the hard questions and they kind of have to deal with you. Certainly in the position I'm in now, they kind of have to. Take Donald Trump. He avoided me for most of the year, right? He wouldn't come on the Kelly File. But that doesn't mean I didn't have the chance to hold him accountable. I did. And Hillary Clinton, she never came on the Kelly File. Not once. Which I would argue did not serve her well. But thank you. Oh, there's my makeup artist clapping. She's on my side. Anyway, so that's the best part. The worst part, I would definitely say the worst part has been the security threats that I've had to face. And as much as I try to avoid it, some of that online vitriol, I get wafts of it, and I really hate it. I find that stuff just soul-killing.
The course of this year, you went from being somebody who reports on the news to becoming the focus of the news.
Right.
And it happened after you asked that question at the first Republican debate to Donald Trump about how he has talked about women in the past. What happened after you asked that question? Actually, let's back up. What happened before you asked that question? Because it's an extraordinary day that you had leading into that.
Well, that's one of the things I reveal in the book is the prequel to that question. And there was one. Trump and I had always had a good relationship prior to that debate. We weren't friends, but we were friendly. And then I did a segment the week before the debate on the Kelly File about his divorce from Ivana Trump. And it wasn't my story. It was a story that the Daily Beast had broken about his divorce 30 years ago, in which Ivana, in sworn deposition testimony, testified that he raped her. It was extremely brutal, according to her testimony, extremely nasty, and very detailed. And the Daily Beast dredged this story back up because Trump had come out in his announcement speech and said Mexicans are sending rapists, and the Daily Beast's point was, speaking of rape, right, that's why they went there. My point in having on the Daily Beast reporter on the Kelly File was to sort of tell the other side of the story and to challenge the reporter named Tim Mack a bit and say, all right, look, she recanted that testimony. She does not stand by it. It was 30 years ago. It was a contentious divorce proceeding in which people notoriously lie. So how did you account for that reality in your reporting, which I thought was not quite skeptical enough of those allegations? So I thought it was very fair to Trump, because we were not the ones dredging up his divorce. Somebody else was, and it wasn't just the Daily Beast. That story had gone everywhere. I put the guy on, I challenged him, it was fine. Donald Trump was not happy. He was not happy I put the story on. He wasn't happy we gave it any airtime at all. And he insisted that I call him that Monday before the Thursday presidential debate. That August 6th first Fox News debate was a Thursday night, and he was supposed to come on the Kelly File that Monday. And he wouldn't unless I called him personally. So I called him, and it did not go well. And he said, "You never should have put that story on your show." I said, "Look, I did you a favor. You should be thanking me." Everybody was talking about that story without even reporting that she had recanted and all this other stuff. "Oh, no, you never should have put that. Bill O'Reilly didn't put that on his show." I said, "Well, Bill O'Reilly's not my editorial gauge." He said, "I never want to see that kind of story on your show again." I said, "Mr. Trump, you don't control the editorial on the Kelly File." And that is when he blew and started screaming at me. "You're a disgrace. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. You're a disgrace. I almost unleashed my beautiful Twitter account against you, and I still may."
That was the first bullying you'd had since 7th grade.
I don't know if I would classify that as bullying so much as just an angry politician, which I'm used to. But that was, I mean, the threat of the Twitter account was clear. And at this point, I already have that woman question drafted. I mean, I know I'm asking him. This has been drafted for weeks. Although that opening round, which was just electric and hard questioning for all of them, that had been in the bag for weeks. So now I'm, in a position where I know he's angry. He feels antagonized. He wasn't antagonized, but he feels antagonized. And he spent those 4 days really sort of sniffing around the Fox News executives to try to feel me out a bit. Like, what are you going to do about her? What's the story with her? What's going to happen with her? And no one ever told me he was trying to get me pulled from the debate, but it was very clear he was focused on me. Extraordinarily focused on me. And, at the time I thought to myself, this would be the biggest news story in the country if people knew that he had threatened to unleash his beautiful Twitter account on me and has called every Fox executive in the building prior to the first presidential debate. But I was not at liberty to reveal that. That was not a conversation that he had given me permission at that time to reveal, nor did I think it was appropriate. It was something where, I didn't want to screw up the Fox News debate. And even then, I had to sense he might not show if he got angrier. And I did not want that. And then we had that Thursday debate, and I would say the rest is history.
So you asked the question, was there bullying that followed?
Was there bullying?
Yeah, that followed. In all of the onslaught of attacks against you that question prompted, not just from Mr. Trump, but from Mr. Trump's beautiful Twitter account.
Yeah.
You were really put under a lot of pressure.
Well,
They were vicious.
I would say that there was an attempted bullying. Because if you look up the definition of bullying in the dictionary, it talks about obtaining a desired effect. And
He didn't shut you up.
he did not obtain the desired effect. But it is a credit to my team at the Kelly File that he didn't, because it was hard to hold the line night after night after night and not cover him too harshly because my life was being threatened, and not cover him too gently because I wanted him to stop the nonsense or to please him. I made a promise to the audience after he really came after me in August that I would continue to cover him without fear or favor, which is a line from the New York Times about 100 years ago. But it still works as a journalistic principle. And I had a team of people that helped me do that. And it was hard because the point I tried to make to Donald Trump in that May interview we had, and the point I want others to know right now, and one of the reasons why I included all this in the book, is that when Donald Trump comes after you, it isn't just a tweet. It's like, oh wow, he's tweeting about her. And I understand he's a fighter, and he really is a fighter, and he's a counterpuncher. I get all that. But even then, he had such power that a single tweet could unleash hell in somebody's life. And I'm not even a civilian, right? I'm a journalist. Now, I would say he put me on the playing field when I belong on the sidelines. But we can't have, a President Trump pulling people right out of the fan stands and doing this to them because they criticize him, because most people don't work for a company that nets $1 billion a year. and can hire round-the-clock security for somebody like me. And really, I've been under armed guard for 16 months, and my children have been under armed guard, and it's not an appropriate price to pay for hard-hitting journalism.
And it... Do you worry, Megyn, that in this era in which people are subjected, in the most extreme version, to what you've been subjected to, but pretty much every journalist I know who has covered this election campaign has had some form, milder form of what you've been through, there will be a knock-on effect, which means that the powers that be are not held to account in the way that they should be. And I should point out that this doesn't just come from the individual politicians. What happens when a politician turns on you, for those of you who've never been in this position, is that then all of their legions of followers turn on you too. Mm-hmm. And it really is an army. I've been in that position myself, and you're besieged by attacks. And if you're a woman, you're besieged by really vicious, brutal, misogynistic attacks too. Mm-hmm.
Well,
and the aim is to shut us up.
I do worry about younger reporters and reporters who work for a place with very little means. You know, without it costs a lot of money to have round-the-clock security, and you can't. That can't go on forever. At some point, the security has to go away, and your company can't keep footing that bill. So we have to accept the reality of that threat. I will say this too, though: the vast majority of Donald Trump supporters are not at all this way.
Yeah.
Not at all. In fact, I have millions of them watching the Kelly File every night. And I know that there are so many people out there who say, I love Donald Trump, and I love you too. You know, I don't like what he said about you, and maybe they say, I don't really like your first question to him, but they can hold those two ideas in their head. It's like, you know, it's that far corner of the internet that really enjoys nastiness and threats. And unfortunately, there is a man who works for Donald Trump whose job it is to stir these people up. And that man needs to stop doing that. His name is Dan Scavino.
Yeah. And the internet is a nasty place. And I think the fact that it's anonymous somehow allows people to be that much more vicious.
Yeah.
I think if people had to put their names to the things they write, they wouldn't write half the stuff they send.
Well, it's fine. You can try to ignore it to some extent, but when it crosses over into an actual physical threat, you have to start paying attention.
A question. Do you watch your show at home when it's broadcast later?
When it's broadcasting, we like back later on the DVR?
Do you watch it back?
Not usually, no. Because I don't get home till around like 11:30, midnight. And if I'm lucky, my husband Doug is still awake, and we'll have a glass of wine, and we'll talk about our day, and we'll talk about our kids. And we will talk about how the show went. You know, he'll watch it. But I don't usually watch it unless there's something I thought that was bad on it. And then I'll usually watch it before I leave Fox News. I turn on the TiVo, I'm like, we screwed that up.
When have you felt imposter syndrome, and how did you overcome it?
Well, that's an interesting question. I feel like I haven't really had huge self-confidence problems in my life. You know, I'm not somebody who's like, I have no confidence and I need to be built up. And I do think that that's a gift of my parents' realism with me, the radical honesty. I never had an experience where I thought I was good at something and I wasn't, because really I just assumed I was mediocre at most things, and if it turned out I was better than mediocre, I was like, great, okay, I'll pursue this. But I would say that when I was a lawyer, I was definitely not the smartest lawyer in the ranks. You know, I was up against these Harvard Law School graduates, people who were first in their class, and those people have special brains, they just do. And so I would just work 10 times harder than anybody so that I could hang. And I did hang. I was right there with them, but it was exhausting. And I would say socially, I don't know how I want to put this. I have some insecurities socially. You know, and I write in the book about how Sheryl Sandberg and I became friends after this segment I did one time. And she knew that I was going out to the Fortune Most Powerful Women's Conference. And she wasn't going to be there, but she was going to be there the next day, but she wanted me to meet all these great women who she knew. So she's like, I'm going to connect you via email, and you should meet these women in the bar the Friday night before the Saturday conference. I said, okay, great. And these are like really powerful women, luminaries in business. And so now it comes the time where I'm supposed to walk into the bar and meet up with the women. And I'm walking through the bar thinking, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I'm thinking to myself, no one is going to stop me because they don't really want me. That's what I'm thinking to myself. Has this ever happened to you? Right? And I think one of the problems is people look at somebody like me now and think, but it's never happened to her. And it's like, we are all the same on some basic level. We all have the same sort of social challenges we go through, or work challenges or doubts. So I walk through the bar, nobody stops me. And then I actually had to work up the courage to walk back through the bar the other way. And once again, nobody stopped me. So I was like, that's it, I can check the box. I tried, I'm going back to my hotel room, I'm ordering room service. I'm in my safe space. And then, so I was disappointed in myself that I didn't try harder, to make a connection. And then the next day, I sat like this with Cheryl at the conference, and she interviewed me. And I told that story. And all the women who I was supposed to meet up with were in the audience. And then the most extraordinary thing happened. That my email lit up with all those women saying, oh my God, we didn't see you. We would have loved to have seen you. Let's pick another date. And it was so sincere, and I believed it. And I thought, shit. Sometimes you're your own worst enemy. And so socially, I would say, I play more of those games in my head than professionally.
You talk in the book when you start in journalism about going to therapy. And it's related to this because I think there's a bit where you say that you wanted to be invulnerable. And that you realize that women don't surround themselves with other women who project only strength and no humanity. Mm-hmm. And I think it was Roger Ailes who said to you that you were trying to be too perfect. Mm-hmm. And I always think that television is an X-ray. And that you can just tell who somebody is. And if you're faking it, everybody's going to know.
Yep.
But you had to learn something.
Well, and this is sort of the aha moment of the book, and the beginning of my decision to settle for more in my life. And more means more from yourself. That's what it means. It doesn't mean more money or more goods. It means more from yourself. But I had gotten to Fox News. I had made it onto broadcast television as a professional, living. And the messaging that started to come in to me from all different circles was the same. So first, I had a negative experience with somebody in the Fox News Bureau, a woman, and Britt Hume saw me right after it happened. And he was always my mentor and kind, and he pulled me in and he said, do you know what your problem is? You're just as vulnerable as anybody else, but you project zero vulnerability. So people think that they can hurt you, or they try to, and they think they can do it with impunity. Then Roger Ailes had me up to his office. And he said, love the whole package. Love the voice, love the logo, everything. Now who's the real you? And I was like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? And it's still the post-bullying me with like the protective shell on me. Like, you can't hurt me. I'm fine. I'm good. Like, screw you. I am strong. So this is the first time somebody was asking me to take off the shell, which is scary. And then I was seeing a therapist because I was considering leaving my first husband, who, for the record, I have a lovely relationship with to this day. We're still friends. He remarried, has 3 kids. I remarried, have 3 kids. But I was struggling with that decision. So I started to see a therapist who is referred to in the book as My Lady Amy, who saved me. And she offered me the same challenge. She was seeing the same thing. And she wanted me to go to a women's group. So she wanted me to see her 1 time a week and go to a women's group. And I was like, how screwed up am I? Like twice a week? And I was already on TV, so I'm like, I have to go in there, going to be like, oh my God, that Megyn Kelly from Fox News is so screwed up.
I have to say the women's group is great.
And it was amazing.
They were great.
And they were so brutally honest with me, and I was honest with them back. It was extraordinary. And I write about this in more detail in the book, but one night I came in, women at Fox were going out for a drink, and they didn't ask me to go with them. And my feelings were so hurt.
This is a bit like the party, where they ring you up and
Well,
say...
don't you always, I don't know, am I the only one who feels like they don't want me? Like maybe they don't want me. You know, maybe there's something about me that they don't want. And so I did feel that again, and I went to the women's group to say, they were right outside of my door, they were talking about the happy hour, and they didn't ask me. And I thought I was going to get this soft shoulder to cry on, but as I write in Settle for More, what I got was something even better, which was honesty. And the one woman in the group said, through tears, she said to me, I wouldn't have invited you either. And I was like, why? She barely even knew me. And she told me why. She told me it was like the final exclamation point on what I'd heard from Britt and what I'd heard from Roger and what I was starting to sense in my own life, which was what you project is off-putting and kind of intimidating and not that likable, right? And she said, honestly, if I sat next to you, I feel like I'd have nothing to relate to in you, that you never have a bad hair day. You always have it together. You are Little Miss Perfect, which is one of the chapter titles. And for so many years, I would have heard that and I would have been like, oh good, it's working. and that year, which was 2005 into 2006, was the beginning of my recognition that that was not working for me, and it was a very self-defeating defense mechanism I had been using for years. And I am happy to tell you that through a lot of hard work, I did get the shell off. And I believe it's the reason I found Doug, my husband, and I have the 3 kids with him that I have now. It's the reason I have true friendships in my life now in a way that I struggled with earlier. And I also absolutely believe it's the secret to my success as a broadcaster.
Which brings us to this question. You always seem so poised. How do you maintain your composure? She's really not. She's a bit of a mess, but we had to work on it a bit before she came out here.
I have learned to control my temper. I'm Irish Catholic, so I have a temper, and the other half's Italian. So I look at her. Again, my makeup artist Vincenzo, who you'll get to know in the book. She's no shrinking violet. I am able to control my temper. And I think that's the key, is, again, back to it's okay to, feel emotional or feel tears coming on or whatever, but you have to play hurt. And the same is true when you're angry. I'll have moments on the set, I'm sure you can think of some, where I'll think, don't get angry. Don't get angry. But I am angry. And then, don't show your anger. So, I can do that. I'm not a monkey. I don't have to just act on all my instincts. I can just sort of talk myself and walk myself through it. And so can you. Just practice.
Yeah. Roger Ailes has been kind of hovering around the edge of the conversation, so let's bring him in, because another revelation that you have in the book that you talk about again for the first time, Megyn, is your relationship with Roger. And I should point out, when you first met Roger, he was a great mentor to you.
Yep.
He really helped you at Fox. This is hard, to tell somebody you're trying to be too perfect and you've got to change in order to really connect, but we think you're great.
Yep.
So he was responsible for launching your career, but the relationship changed.
It did, and I felt it was important to leave all the good things about Roger in the book, even though the chapter 24, as it's become known in my circles, with my friends and family, because it was the second to last chapter, was added late, because the scandal broke late. And then I had a decision to make. Do I go back and try to scrub the book of any kind references to him? Because I too was learning about him when I was writing chapter 24. And in the end, I thought that's dishonest, because Roger Ailes is not all bad. He's not all good. And I mean, the long and the short of it is, and I think, honestly, in a way, that's the chapter of which I'm almost most proud. It's the one I worked the hardest on. I wrote that chapter, and I rewrote that chapter, and I rewrote that chapter about 1,000 times. And so every word in that chapter has been poured over, you know, by me, by my husband Doug, and by some close friends who I dared to show it to. So you'll see the complete picture when you read it, and I urge you to do that because I made sure to tell the whole story there in context. You know, I've done all these interviews that have been so annoying, not this one, where they just want to sort of punch you on the highlight.
She's got another 10 minutes, so she has to say that.
No, but it's like, you know, like, why didn't you come forward earlier? And it's like, you know what, can I swear here? Yeah, listen, fuck you for saying that. Like, honestly, it's like, you don't get to ask me why I didn't come forward until you ask me whether there was a safe avenue for reporting at my company, and only if the answer to that is yes, may you ask me that next question. So that's the headline right there. But the story is that I joined Fox News. It was my dream job. I had only been working part-time in television. He hired me. He gave me a great opportunity. And then 12 months into my tenure, he called me up to New York, sat me down, gave me a bunch of great advice, including, now who's the real you? And the untold part of that meeting and others like it was it would be coupled with highly inappropriate sexual references. And in the beginning, listen, I don't speak the Queen's English, as you've come to see. Get that? That was for you.
I'm glad that you felt you had to make sure I'd got it.
And I also have a bawdy sense of humor. I don't offend that easily. You know, my mom, my Nana, they love dirty jokes. It's like, I don't offend easily. So in parts of it, I was like, okay, this is just sort of, you know, don't be too uptight, don't be too uptight. And then he would cross these lines where you're like, oh, whoa, that's inappropriate by any measure. And you know when that's happened. And in the book, listen, I could have filled 4 pages with the comments he made, but I didn't want to go there. I included enough so that you can decide for yourself whether it was sexual harassment. I submit to you it is unambiguous, because people like to, they don't want to be told. They want to see the evidence and judge for themselves. And it was a terrifying 6 months because I understood that my career was on the line. I knew 2 things. I knew there was no way I was going to do anything with him. And I knew, well, it's not because of appearance. It's because of integrity. And I knew that it was very likely this was going to end disastrously, because I assumed that at some point it was going to escalate from comments to a physical attempt to be with me, and then I would have to reject him outright, which was the one thing I didn't want to have to do. You know, I was sort of dancing the dance where it was like, ha ha ha, back to work. Or like, oh yeah, well, so anyway. And that worked okay for me, and I could get out of there. Look, all the women are shaking their head yes. Like, guys are having such a different reaction to this than women in my life, because I think, I mean, at least, I'm going to say 90%, maybe that's too high, of women have experienced this in one way, shape, or form. And I think a lot of men are like, wow, really? Anyway, it did culminate in a physical attempt to be with me in his office. Again, I've been with the company for 18 months by that point. I'm not the Megyn Kelly of today. I have no power. I mean, 0. And he was on the cover of industry magazines as the most powerful man in news. And I didn't want to blow up my relationship with him. I wanted to have a good relationship. I was doing well at Fox News. You know, I was performing well. I was earning my stripes. I wanted that to be the standard by which I was judged. And as soon as we had that physical confrontation in his office and I did not do anything, I ran out of his office. I hired a lawyer. And for the record, I did tell a supervisor, which is what you are supposed to do. And the long story made short is, years went by, and I would look for other women. Ultimately, years later, I found one, but hers had happened right around the time mine had happened. And I had convinced myself, based on what my supervisor had told me, that he's not a bad man. He's just smitten. He might be having a marital difficulty. And so when Gretchen's lawsuit hit, I wasn't sure about that one, for reasons we don't need to go into, but the allegations that hit later that day in the Daily Beast, 3 women came forward anonymously, former Fox News employees, and I knew as soon as I saw that. I knew. And then I had a decision to make. Because ultimately the company had said they were going to conduct an internal review, and then somebody told me that Roger was working to limit that review to only a small circle of people who had worked directly with Gretchen. And I knew what that would mean. No on-air talent. Not me, not my friend, not any of the other women who were probably speaking to the Daily Beast. And, you know, I write in the book about how I looked at this picture of Yardley, my 5-year-old. And she is on top of a jungle gym. She's in this white dress with red dots, and she's got the blonde hair down, and she's got her sneakers on, and she had fallen off the monkey bars a week earlier and cracked her head open, and she had gotten stitches. But she was back up on top of that monkey bars. And I'm flipping through my photos at the Jersey Shore. And honestly, I just said, this will not happen to one more woman at Fox News, ever. And that's when I picked up the phone and I called Lachlan Murdoch. And I told him to get his general counsel on the phone. And then I told them about what had happened to me 10 years earlier. And I told them the good and the bad about my relationship with him. I didn't want them to think he was some monster. I just wanted them to know this is real, and you need to take an honest look into his behavior. That's all I wanted, just an honest review. I figured if there was nothing there, they would exonerate him. And if he went down, he would have only himself to blame. And I believe that's where things wound up.
One of the, there's all the awful stuff about harassment during the course of this campaign, and the conversation that I think has been long overdue, because like you, I think probably 90% of women have gone through something similar at some point in their lives. And the tendency has always been questions like you had. Why didn't you come forward? Why didn't you tell somebody? As if the woman herself was the person that was the problem.
Right.
I mean, blaming the victim has to stop.
Oh, and the discussion about like how we look.
Yeah, as if that's remotely relevant.
That's why I included in the book, when he was harassing me, I still look like the lawyer Megyn Kelly. I had on my long pants and my navy and black suits. I had not yet been foxified. All right?
Well, excuse me, even if you looked exactly as gorgeous as you do this evening, it's still not okay.
But
it's not okay.
But
ever.
that's what I want to say. So to the haters who would look at those of us with our false eyelashes and our cute little dresses and say, like, you asked for it. You know, again, fuck you for saying that.
Right.
As you get,
It's never okay.
It has nothing to do with how you dress or look.
And there was that brilliant...
It's about power.
The brilliant woman in Canada, the writer, who, I don't know if you saw it, this was one of the most uplifting, one of the few uplifting parts of an incredibly long and exhausting campaign, was after all of these stories came out and the Access Hollywood tape came out with Donald Trump, she set up a website and she asked people to, it was just a whim, she's a writer in Canada, and she said, please write in if you've had instances, tweet me if you've had instances of sexual harassment in the course of your life. Tens of thousands of women wrote into her. And that was the conversation that needed to be had, and I hope that we don't drop it.
Honestly, can I tell you?
Going forward.
So my story's gotten a lot of attention because I've just written a book. But the unsung heroes of that episode are the women of Fox News who don't have a primetime show, who at great risk to themselves because no one thought he was going to get fired, found the nerve to walk into Paul Weiss once the Murdochs started that investigation and told their story, believing that he would continue being their boss. And those women want their anonymity, and I certainly would never out them, but those are the truly courageous ones.
Much harder than it sounds to come forward. We have a couple more minutes. Megyn actually has to do the Kelly file at 9 o'clock, so we will.
This is so much more fun than that.
We can just carry on gabbing. Settle for more. Everyone knows you're in the process, your contract is up, you're in a contract year, you've written this book that's a #1 New York Times bestseller. Congratulations, Megyn.
Thank you.
That's wonderful. What's the more? What's the more you want now? What does Megyn Kelly want more of?
Well, I mean, for me, it's pretty clear. You know, I'm doing a job I love, but there's something I love more. 3 little people and a big person named Doug. And Doug and I are good. We see each other because he's a writer. He writes books for a living. He actually is a writer. And he's good, so he has a flexible work schedule and we can see each other. But, and I'm pretty open about this and Settle for More. I am missing too much of my children's childhood. You know, when I first started this job, they were just barely 4. They were 3, 2, and newborn. And I had the whole day with them, and then I'd go to work at 3:30 or 4 and get home at midnight. And now they're aging, and they're 7, 5, and 3.
So are we.
Yeah, what? And now 2 out of my 3 go to school at 8:15 and they don't get home until 3:30, right when I'm walking out the door. And honestly, that is not acceptable to me. That's not more. And they mean too much to me. I refuse to miss their childhood just so I can, you know, do a job that I love. So I'm not breaking news here. I've said all of this to my employers. They know this too. And that's my challenge now in deciding what I'm going to do. You know, can I find a way to, you know, work with my schedule at Fox such that I can continue to do the Kelly File and see my children? And if the answer to that is no, then I'll have to make a different decision because they are most important.
Settle for More is the book. Megyn Kelly, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Thanks for coming.